And I think that's where people lose it with graying out of villains, where they're like, "Oh, but I want you to empathize with them." I don't agree with that. I don't want you to empathize with my villains. I want you to see them as a human being. I want you to see them as, a nuanced creature. I don't want you to empathize with them. They're still a piece of garbage. Like, like
Piece of
I'm
garbage, and
fine.
they deserve everything that's coming to them.
Right, right.
100%.
And I think that's where a lot of writers miss here recently
Yeah.
with this whole, basically making villains really close to heroes, just doing a thing different.
Last week, I spoke about the 6 layers of mythic storytelling. This week, you decided you needed to be twice as big. Is that because you're American?
Yes, and male
So
and a bit
tell us
insane.
about.
No, I had to six up you is all. That's all it was. I don't want to just one up you. No, I just figured we were on a layer kick and we should look at layers. I
Who
even made a
doesn't
seven
like
layer
layers?
dip. I even made a 7 layer dip this morning for breakfast.
Uh,
Just,
Dips, dips come in like cakes come in layers. Lots of good things
yeah,
comes in layers.
that's right.
So, what are the 12 layers that you've got for us today?
So in the writer's room, the number one thing that I think every single person in there is working on, struggling with at some level or another is that mythical interiority. And
Mm.
yes, we just dropped an episode on interiority just a couple weeks ago. One of the things that I do a lot of is I spend a lot of time thinking of how to teach these kind of abstract, esoteric topics. I'm not an academic. I don't like academia. I don't think academia actually knows how to really break something down and teach it in a way that's usable. They teach it in a way that sounds really good, but for a lot of us, I'm a blue collar kind of person. So when an academic tells me all this highbrow stuff, I don't know what to do with it. I don't know how to use it. And so they'll say stuff like, well, you just got to have interiority. And it's like, okay, but I don't, first of all, it's not even a real word. Second of all, I don't even know what that means. So I spent a lot of my time trying to figure out how to break these topics down into very manageable bites that are actionable. And I think that's the reason why people come to us for teaching, because we do that. We sit down and we break this stuff down in a very kind of blue collar kind of way, not a highbrow, this sounds really good way. So I'd already been working on trying to layer out the different layers of interiority because there's so much, and that's what I started realizing, because people are like, well, how do you do it, like, and I'm like, well, like right here, here's an opportunity to do this thing, like looking at their writing, or right here you have an opportunity to expand upon this, or right here you could show me how they feel about what, like there was just this week somebody, one of the secondary characters said to their son something horrific, something like, um he was talking about the POV character, but he said something like, she has something you don't have, spunk. But I mean, he said it to his son. And if I'm sitting there in that room and I'm the POV character and I just watched a father say to their son, I'm going to have a reaction. I'm going to be like, whoa, wow, that was brutal or
Yeah.
something. But they didn't. They actually showed the reaction of what the father, they showed an external reaction of the father. And I'm like, but I'm not it. I don't. The father is just the secondary character. Like, I want to know how I reacted.
Yeah. How does the person feel?
Right. I just watched a father just cut their son to the bone.
Yeah.
That should impact me somehow. And so I started realizing that there's a lot of different layers. So last night after group, I was thinking there were 4 or 5 layers in my head. But when I really sat down and started kind of defining it and going through and trying to figure out exactly what it was, I started realizing there's a lot. And that's where I came up with the 12 layers. And they do get more abstract as as we go down the list. Um, but I think, yeah, I think we should just talk about all 12 of them. I had said maybe we cut a few of these out, but you were like, no, they're all important. We'll do 2 episodes if we need to. So that's kind of where we're at. We'll just go through them one at a time. We'll talk about them, bounce around
Yeah.
ideas. If this turns into a dual episode, then it'll
So
turn
be
into a
it.
dual episode. um, but this is important. This is again, this is the number one thing that I see missing in 95, 99% of all writing. And I feel like this is what readers are looking for. Um, I want to start off with a story because I think this frames everything. And it also hopefully dispels, and we've talked about this thing before because it's something that really pisses us off, where there's YouTubers out there that are like, there's no such thing as interiority, there's no such thing as showing, there's no such thing as, and then they'll do an entire episode on there's no such thing as this thing that we are like, it's literally right there. Like you could see it. Like there it is. But they don't understand it, and so they do one of the things that we have on here. They do the denial. um, so one of the things that happens when you're on tour is other authors, that you meet will trade books with you. And it's really cool. You get to meet a bunch of people, you get to read other people's stuff, and you get to let them read your stuff and all of that. But there's this one group of writers that I'm friends with all of them, but I don't like any of their work. Not
Mhm.
that they're bad writers, they're fine writers. They're all professional writers. They work for companies, even writing. I've never read one of their stories that I got to the end and went, wow, I can't wait to read something else from this person. And I never really thought about it because they're all friends and I don't want to, analyze their work or anything like that. I'll read a couple of chapters of something they gave me. I'll lose interest and I'll put it on the shelf and be done with it. Won't even think about it again. Well, one of these people in this group I hadn't read and they hadn't read me and we'd been friends for years. And so they actually said that one time we were at a convention, I've never read you and I don't think you've read me. And I was like, no, I haven't. He's like, why don't we, here's one of my books. I'll take one of your books and we'll go. And I was like, yeah, great. And so I read again 4 or 5 chapters, maybe at the most, put it on the shelf, didn't think about it again, never hooked me. But then I got an email from them and he said something to me that no one has ever said to me. Like no one, not even back when I was unpublished and just first learning to write. He said, you're a really good writer, except for you're very telly. You need to be more showy. And I was just blown away by that because that's the number one thing people compliment me on is being such a showy writer. And so I asked him, I was like, I don't, thanks for this information. I don't understand. Like, I don't see it. So could you show me some examples? Because I'd like to learn this. And he was like, oh, yeah, great. And he said, it's very simple. If you write anything a camera can't see, you're telling. And I was like, now I understand why I don't like any, because they're a group, they're a writers group. They all hang together. They all feed off each other in their own little echo chamber. And so I started pulling all their books off the shelf and looking through them. And chapter after chapter, no interiority, no interiority, no interiority, no interiority. They were literally writing movie scripts. They were literally writing only what a camera could see. And I realized then that it was like, this is why I don't care about these guys' stories. Not that the stories were written well, they were interesting. They had interesting characters and interesting, the sin structure was great. Their grammar was great. They weren't bad writers. They just didn't have that layer. And so I never connected with the character. So I never connected with the story. And, I don't argue with people. So I just sent them back and I was like, okay, thanks. I'll see if I can work on that. Um, I'm not going to tell a professionally published author that they're doing this thing wrong.
Yeah.
Um, but plus they're friends of mine and I don't want him, technically one of them was my boss at one point for one of the companies that I worked for. But
But they were definitely doing that thing wrong.
I agree. I agree with that. And that is why this is so important. It's why we work on it every week in the writer's room. We're constantly working on interiority, interiority, interiority. And so, yeah, I think that frames everything of if you're wanting to know why people read your stuff and don't really connect with it, don't really have it linger with them, have it stay with them, for extended period of times, don't come back to you and go, man, do you got the next thing? When's the next thing? I want the next thing. Like that desire to get
Mm.
more and more and more. It's because they felt something. But the only way to make them feel something is that interiority. So I think that's the reason why it's so important. And I think that's the reason why so many people innately know. It's like show don't tell. So many people are out there going, I don't understand this. I feel like I need to do it. You have a few people like it doesn't exist because you can't describe it. So it obviously doesn't exist. And I'm like, I can describe it. Um,
All
so
right, so let's get on with our 12 layers.
yes,
I think we've preambled quite a bit.
yes. Sorry. I did warn you that I just woke up and
I
just
know, but
jumped
it is
right onto this.
part of my role is keeping us on a more uh, focused path.
I agree. I agree with that. I need that. All right. So layer one. Um, well, actually, somebody mentioned before we started this, so let's just start. This isn't one of the layers, and it's also something that I don't think anyone misses, but they were talking about behavior. Um, but that's the external layer. That's the stuff that almost everybody knows to write. The fact that they're putting poison in a drink, or that they're yelling at somebody, or that they're smooching on somebody, or whatever. So that's not interiority. Does it show what they're feeling inside? Sure, of course it does. I mean, if I'm going to put poison in your drink, obviously I don't love you. But that's the external stuff that is that external layer that I think everybody gets.
Well, I mean, Mustache Man did poison his wife at the end in the bunker.
Oh, I didn't get what you meant at first with, yeah, I
Mustache
got it.
Man,
I
you
got
know.
it. I got it. Because when you said that, my brain went to Cancer Man in the X-Files, and I was like, I don't remember his wife even being in that. Yes, I get what you mean. But
But
did he
yes,
really
generally,
love
if you
her?
poison somebody, you don't generally poison them.
Right, right. Um, was Mustache Man even capable of love? Just gonna throw that out there. Anyway, so that's the external stuff. That's the story. But just get that out of the way in case anybody else's mind goes down that path. That's that side. But this first one, you could say is not interiority as well, but that's body language.
Mm.
Fidgeting or tapping a foot or biting your nails or any of that stuff. And yes, that is not interiority. But the reason why I included on here, and we can discuss this, I subtitled this Interiority Clues. And really, what this is the only thing. Remember, for our secondary and tertiary characters, all we get is what they say and what they do. We don't get inside of them. We're not head hopping. So, this is really the interiority for secondary and tertiary characters. That's kind of how I see it. Because I can't know what they're thinking, but if they're tapping their foot or if they're fidgeting, they're biting their nails, they're, whatever they're doing, that's my way of getting a hint of what's going on inside of that character's body. And so that's the reason why I start here with the body language. But you want to do this with your main character too, because it's still all clues to that reader of what's going on inside of them.
I had somebody pop me once in like a critique on like, you can't say if you're the POV character that their brows raised because they can't see their own brows raised. And I'm like, of course I can say it. You can feel your freaking
I'm like,
brows raised.
I can feel that.
Yeah, it doesn't matter that I can't see it. Like, it's a thing that's happening to my body.
Right. I mean, with that case, you can't write that he reached out and picked up a pen.
Yeah,
Um, in a dark room.
yeah,
He's in a dark room. You can't write. He reached out and picked up the pen because he
yeah.
can't see it.
So, some people get very weird and hung up on very random stuff. But anyway,
Well, but actually, it's not even just random stuff because we say stuff, me and you say stuff all the time, like avoiding ly adverbs or wases or red
yeah.
flags, or like I've been on a rampage against the word now because
Hmm.
of all the old early 1900
Then
fantasies that I'm reading.
then
Then, now.
started
Yeah,
began.
right. So somebody last night had one now in her entire little thing, and she was like, I don't know how to get rid of it. I tried. She even had it highlighted in red for us to talk about. But it wasn't now as in stage direction. It was completely used in a, I'm like, she's like, I don't know how to fix this. And I was like, you stop, you change the color from red back to black. That's how you fix it.
It's fine.
Like
Like
it's,
I was working with somebody in the writer's room and they had a flashback, and at the end of it, I was like, that was a good flashback. That worked.
yeah,
Because, like, these things are, because they're overused, because they're used poorly, they come across as poorly. And so we say avoid them. But we
yeah,
don't mean like it's a rule and we are, anytime you use this is wrong.
yeah,
We mean, especially when you're started, try and avoid these things because you're probably going to use it wrong because you don't yet know how to use it impactfully.
yeah,
And so,
yeah.
you know,
It's funny because I don't think about ly adverbs anymore.
mm,
But the other day I was actually looking at my writing and I did a search, I did a my little macro
mm,
search, and there's way more in it than I thought.
yeah,
But when I looked at each one of them, they aren't in the three problem areas that we talk
mm,
about not using ly adverbs, and we're not going to get into that right now.
yeah,
So so while I do still have now, I was saying I had one every 1 or 2 pages. I'm pretty sure I have about two a page now. So it has definitely crept in quite a bit, but none of them are egregious. None of them are. I mean, ly adverbs are always a tell, but none of them are telly tells.
yeah,
Like whispered quietly or um, whatever.
yeah,
Um,
yeah.
so
Back.
sorry, yeah, we're meandering. Um, anything about body language? Anything?
So I just the only thing I would say about body language is try not to hit too much of the cliches. So I don't mind a jaw dropping occasionally in surprise, but try not to have every surprise be a jaw drop. You
Yeah,
know, consider like eyes wide sometimes, or like dropping something or some kind of other piece of body language, not just always the same
yeah.
ones.
Well, and we all have the things that we lean on too much.
Mm,
I had picked on you with in Magic Falls with the spine. You went to
yeah.
the spine like that was your go-to. I read this chapter from this Harn World story that I'm working on, and in 4 pages or so of this really intense scene, I think I mentioned what the hands were doing like 80 times. They clenched, they did this, they did that. It was just hands, 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 hands. So it was like, wow, I didn't realize I had that many hands. And then we all use heart too much. Everyone uses
Oh,
heart too much.
way too much.
Um, so that's for me. I don't mind cliches. I
I
don't
don't
have a
mind
problem with
cliches, but I'm
cliches.
just like try and vary it. Otherwise, it
Right.
starts
That's
feeling,
for me.
yeah,
That's the thing for
too
me.
much. Yeah,
You've got to be, there's a million things that we have access to.
yeah.
And so we want to vary that.
All right.
Um,
So that's one, body language. What's our
yeah.
next one?
Next would be internal body reactions. And this is one that I think this is the layer that everyone stops at that I notice. So this is that thing where you've been told to show, don't tell.
Yes.
So it's the palms going clammy. It's the cheeks turning hot. It's the butterflies in the stomach. It's stuff like that.
Mm,
Bile rose in their throat.
mm.
It's the physical reactions to emotions. And it is a showy way to show that, and it needs to be there. And that's what I tell all the writers. I'm like, yes, yes, you want this, but you can't stop there because I can't feel anything from that.
So two things. One, you can't stop there. Two, it shouldn't be all the
Right,
reaction that you ever use. And
right,
try not to overdo it. Like, let's say your character gets sweaty palms whenever they're shocked or surprised, whatever. If they get sweaty palms every page, it starts feeling like, oh my God, these guys just like they're just dripping with water.
yeah,
So So try to work on the like the different reactions internally as well as the not always having this as the reaction.
Well, when you stop at that, which is like I said, that's where I
Mm,
see most writers stopping because and I get it. They've been told, but this is the showy way to do it. Don't
mm,
tell me he's afraid. Show me he's afraid by his sweaty palms or whatever. Okay, yes, I agree with that. That is that is a more showy way to do this. But it also, in my opinion, it's more superficial. It's
mm.
still a layer that the reader doesn't experience.
Yeah.
They don't feel it. They see it. It is, to me, it's just one step layer, one layer deeper of the clue. So body
Mm,
language is just that external clue of what you're feeling inside. Sweaty palms is just one layer deeper of a clue of what you're feeling. But it's not actually what you're feeling because I don't know what you're actually feeling. I just know your palms are sweaty or bile's
yeah.
rising in your throat. Maybe you're fearful. Maybe you're seeing something, whatever you're seeing is making you physically ill. Maybe you just had a bad burrito for breakfast. Like, I don't know. Maybe you just have indigestion really bad today. Like, yes, I can get it from context, and yes, I'm being, tongue in cheek there, but it's still just superficial. That's the problem with it. It doesn't actually give the reader that 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 really intimate connection with the character. It is showy. You should do them. Not saying don't do them. I do them all the time. They're vitally important to interiority. But you
But they're
can't
just,
stop there.
yeah. So what is our third layer?
Well, and the third layer is actually the same as the second layer. Um, I just popped it out because I felt we could talk about it separately. But it's a metaphorical or poetic internal reactions. So this is where we get artsy with his heart leapt into his throat. Like, no, it didn't actually, but we know what that means.
Yeah.
Um, and so there's not really anything new to say
Or
about it, but
even butterflies in the stomach or
right,
whatever, fantasy equivalent in the stomach.
right.
Okay. So that can serve a very nice purpose in terms of bringing the world into the story. So instead of having butterflies in the stomach, you can have night wing moths in the stomach or whatever you want, whatever exists in your world. And that can be a nice way to bring the world building in. And, but again, if everybody's getting butterflies in their stomachs all the time, or steel bands are clamping around their ribs, with fear, or they, they're,
I just wrote, and I was writing on Harm World yesterday, and I wrote something like, um, it felt as if the entire mountain, I didn't use the word felt, but basically it felt as if the entire mountain was pressing down on him. Like,
yeah,
it's a very metaphorical, the mountain's not
yeah,
actually pressing down on him because he'd be dead.
yes,
So,
exactly.
and I call this the language of felt emotions. That's my
Mm,
subtitle for this. So it's still more showy. It's the same exact thing as the internal body language. And you're right, I said butterflies in your stomach. What I meant to write, my example was um his gut churned, which is the same, that's a less poetic way of saying butterflies in his stomach. Um, but yeah, that's all this is. So it's not really any different. It's just a different way to do it. It gives you more variation. So we can have, you know, his stomach churned in one time, and then a couple pages later, we can have butterflies erupted in his stomach. We're
yeah.
saying the same thing. We're just doing it two different ways to give that variety. So that's why I broke it out, just to kind of think about it differently. That we
Mm,
do have those two separate things, physical and the metaphorical or poetic.
yeah. And I mean that it sounds great. It sounds better than just sweaty palms the whole side, and I absolutely I support using metaphorical language.
Right.
Again, like but not always, and it's not where you should
But it's
stop.
not it's not the end game.
Yeah,
It still doesn't make the reader feel anything.
yeah,
All right, this
exactly.
next one is the one that the internet's going to throw hate at us.
Okay.
Um, Actual feelings. I call this naming the feeling. This is the one that so many people are like, it's a tell. Like terror gripped him.
Yeah,
I think if you don't have these, you're missing the boat.
I agree. So I think two things about naming the feeling. One, um, I like to use the term you viscerally tell. I don't know. I might be pronouncing that wrong. But basically,
I
it's
mean, there's a couple ways to pronounce it. I would pronounce it viscerally, but I think I've heard
viscerally.
it. I've heard it the way you said it too,
You can come at me when you can pronounce Elamar. Um,
or even five of your Finnish words.
and um, and it's when you say something like, terror gripped him, fear skittered over his shoulders,
Right.
the, you know, the whatever you
Yeah.
want to kind of
Well, and the
write in
funny
that.
thing is, I didn't
So
break it out.
what you don't do is you don't say he felt fear.
Right.
Like, please don't do that.
Yeah. I still believe that feel and felt should be avoided at all cost. Although I used it, I think, two or three times in a row in one paragraph in a thing that I wrote this weekend. But it was the right.
Mm,
Like I looked at it and I'm like, I really like that though.
yeah.
It isn't a tell like I felt fear. It was this poetic kind of cadence of this thing.
Mm,
It's a character losing his mind.
yeah.
And so it was a moment that just felt right. Um, yeah, so stay away from feel and felt here. We don't want to be blatantly telly. But terror gripped him, while yes, that you could absolutely say that's a tell, it's not he felt terror.
Yeah.
It still has some action to it.
And it still has an active, like it still makes the terror the active thing, like it's gripping him as
Right.
opposed to, yeah.
He
And
felt fear.
yeah, as opposed to he felt fear. The other thing that I want to say here is that this is a good place. When you name the emotion, it helps also to reflect on it in some way. Okay. So, and
Well,
what I mean, yeah.
that's 11. We're going to get to
Oh,
that if you want to wait for that.
all right, we'll wait for it.
We can jump to 11 real quick because it does tie in.
So what I like to do when not when terror is gripping you, because terror is kind of very immediate and you should deal with
Right.
that. But when you're like, so I just wrote this paragraph today where
Well, let me define it real quick and then
yeah,
'cause, yeah, I love that paragraph that you wrote. Um, so jumping down to 11, I had written philosophical reflection.
yeah,
In other words, the character feeling something and then reflecting on how it affects them on a larger scale or how it affects the world around them on a larger scale.
and it works really
So,
well if you actively name the emotions. So I'll just read these two paragraphs quickly because they're basically just the start of this character's thing. So Gilliam slithered through Somfa's market with the practiced ease of the pickpocket he had once been. Even with a red tassel dangling from his belt, the crush of shoppers ignored him. On the first day of the summer market, not even a Dusang magic user, who had once been a thief, could stand between a Somfa burger and a bargain. It comforted him in an odd way. Even though everything had changed since the night he stood in the cave and faced the Gravastor spirit, somehow nothing had changed. See, it's
yeah,
a direct emotion, tell, plus what does it mean to him to feel that?
yeah, yeah. And that's that philosophical reflection. And that definitely gets very abstract
Mm,
in thinking about it. But that is a part of the character's interiority. That's a part of the character's internal world of how they see not only the emotions that they're feeling, but how they actually feel that that has changed them or how it will change them or how it, what effect does it have them on a larger scale?
mm.
And getting to understand that as a reader makes us feel closer to that character. And
Yeah.
that's what interiority is for. I mean, the bottom line is interiority is there to make you closer to the character.
And the reason why it makes us feel that way is because it gives us the character's worldview.
Hmm.
And because it gives us the character's worldview, that makes it easier to to connect
Em
to them because we feel
empathize.
like we could be a friend to them
Right.
because we know so much about them. We understand how they approach the world.
And I'm not even concerned if my reader feels like they could be a friend of the person. I just want them to understand.
Yeah.
Like like this movie that I was hired to write. I had written this part and I let my wife read it and I was like, so what'd you like about it? And she's like, well, I can tell you what I didn't like about it. And I was like, ooh, that was too quick. You don't like hearing that. And she's
Mm.
like, I didn't like the fact that you made me like the I can't say it on YouTube, but the violator.
Yeah.
Or not like, you made me empathize with him.
Mm.
And I'm like, well, yeah. She's like, no, I just want him to be just an evil piece of garbage, just black and white. He's just evil. I'm
Mm.
like, but he's not. I mean, what he did was vile, and I don't sugarcoat that. I just don't make him, ha ha ha, I'm doing this because I'm an evil person. Like, I give you, you understand, even though you don't agree with it, and you're definitely
Mm.
not going to like it, you still go, yeah, but I see his reasons behind it, and he's not just doing it because he's a caricature of a Bond villain. Like, he's a human being that got swept up in things, and should he have done it? 100% not. But like, it wasn't just him just being a little
So,
evil demon.
so you mentioned could Mustache Man have felt love? And the thing is, I don't know if you've ever seen the movie Downfall, where all the memes come from, of like um, generals and a lot of Germans, a lot of Germans swearing and talking. Um, but Downfall, the movie, is actually a fascinating movie because it does show the human side of Mustache Man. And he was human. And
Hmm.
somebody said to I can't remember who it was. I think it was one of like a Jewish critic or something like that. And somebody said to him, but the way that he's depicted as a human, and the dude was like, what should he have been depicted as? A camel? An elephant?
Right.
I was
Yeah.
like, yeah, pretty much. Like,
Yeah. It doesn't mean that the writer is trying to make you like the person or
yeah,
agree with what he did. We're just trying to show you that, like what I'm doing with
their
that character's.
worldview.
Well, but
Their,
what I'm
like,
trying to show you is we're
yeah,
complicated. So
yeah.
yes, this person did something horrible. Yes, they're a bad person for doing it, but they're not just one thing. They're not just evil. Like, they're still a person. They're still, whatever. And so yeah, I have seen Downfall. I didn't know it existed until I wrote that comic book series, Downfall, the
Mm.
comic book series. And when I went looking to buy the website, I couldn't buy it because it was already taken with that movie. And I was like, oh, I never heard this movie. So I watched it, but that was a long time ago.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, I mean, that's exactly what I feel that we should be doing. And I think that's where people lose it with this is a complete rabbit chase,
Mm.
but the whole graying out of villains where they're like, oh, but I want you to empathize with them. I don't agree with that. I don't want you to empathize with my villains.
Mm.
I want you to see them as a human being. I want you to see them as, a nuanced creature. I don't want you to empathize with them. They're still a piece of garbage. Like, like, like
Piece of
I'm
garbage, and
fine.
they deserve everything that's coming to them.
Right, right.
100%.
And I think that's where a lot of writers miss here recently
Yeah.
with this whole, basically making villains really close to heroes, just
Mm.
doing a thing different. And I don't want that. I don't want to like Mustache Man,
No,
but I do find it interesting
I do
to
want to see him as a human being. And I
right,
do
right,
want to understand his reasoning because I'm sure his reasoning is not something A that I would understand, but B, it's probably not like as blatant as I would make it in my head.
right,
You know, if I were to think of the things that he did, like I'd be like, well, how do you even begin to justify this? You
right.
know?
Yeah. So
Anyway, rabbit
that's
chase.
that
We were
philosophical
on naming the
reflection.
feeling. What is
Well, that was
five? We did 4 and 11. So we did naming
We
the
did
feeling
four
and
and 11,
philosophical
right?
reflection. 5.
So five, 5 and 6 actually go very, very close together.
Hmm.
You could almost think of them as the same thing, but I do see them as different. So five would be narrative monologue. And let me explain what I mean by that. Because six is inner monologue.
Mm,
And the difference between them is both of them are the character thinking something through.
mm,
The difference is one, we're doing it in narrative. So, Drake couldn't believe that this happened, this person did this. How could somebody be so cruel or whatever? And
mm.
I call that a character process because it does give us the character's kind of inner thinking, but not directly. It's not intimate. And that's the reason why I broke out narrative monologue with inner monologue, because inner monologue is the exact same thing. It's just now very, very intimate. I can't believe he did this thing to me. There's just a different feel
Mm.
to, I can't believe he did this thing to me versus Drake couldn't believe he did that thing to him. They both accomplish the same thing, but there is a difference in how deep we're taking the reader into that moment. And so that's the reason why I separated them out as 5 and 6, but they are kind of the same thing. It's the thought process of the character.
So I will occasionally use inner monologue in some forms of writing. I use it in the erotica, for example.
Hmm.
Um, but I don't use it in Sangwheel, mostly because I
Hmm.
didn't start with it. And I feel like once you've started in a style, you must write the books in that style. So,
Agree.
no inner monologue for Sangwheel. But I also like, I would use less inner monologue than you regardless,
Oh, yeah.
because I like, for me, and this is again a stylistic thing, re writers and readers have different tastes. But for me, inner monologue tends to jerk me a little bit out of the story and remind me that I am not this character,
Right.
right? There are layers that I'm not experiencing. And it kind of
Right.
interrupts my flow a little bit. Not always, and not for all inner monologue, but sometimes. And
Hmm.
I think that is in part because inner monologue is occasionally overused and it's occasionally jarring. Like people will write a piece of inner monologue that does not naturally flow from the prose. And then I'm like, wait, why did I think that? Why did that make sense? That doesn't even fit the paragraph above. What is going on here? And that is very jarring. So
Yes.
that's
But it's
my
one of the reasons why. So when I'm teaching inner monologue, I tell everybody, if you're going to use inner monologue, when you use it, write it both ways. Write it in narration and write it in inner monologue. The same thing, just like what I just did there with Drake couldn't believe and I couldn't believe or I can't believe. And then I say if they feel the same, if there's no difference between the two as far as the emotional feeling that I get reading them, I'm going to do it in narration.
yeah.
The only time I'm going to leave it as inner monologue is if I get something extra. If I get something like I do think I get something extra between Drake couldn't believe that Marie screwed him over like that versus I can't believe Marie screwed me over like that.
Yeah.
Like there's just something more personal. There's something more shocking. There's something more almost betrayal feeling that comes with it
And
in
there
addition to the words.
there are some things you can do with inner monologue that you can't do
Right.
with normal prose. So I had this paragraph. So this is a character that's gonna get married into a arranged marriage kind of thing.
Oh,
Elowen
wait.
so yeah,
Wait. Are you going to read the thing that we read before we
yeah,
started?
with a
Let's
circle.
save that one because that's a great example for
Okay.
the imagine for number 9.
All right,
I
cool.
don't want to burn that one because that one is a
Uh,
beautiful example for number
yeah,
9.
we'll save it for that. But yeah, there are things that like I could not do that in narrative monologue because you
You could,
cannot
it
do
just wouldn't
that.
have the impact.
You can't do it because it would read wrong.
Right.
It wouldn't read right. Whereas in inner monologue, it reads right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So for those playing at home, hold that because I did cut
Yeah.
her off, but I really want to save that because that's a beautiful example for one of
Hold
these
that
others that
line.
we're going to talk about. Um,
All right, 7.
all right. So seven would be, and now we're going to start to get much more abstract as we go down through here.
Mm.
But what I wrote for seven was subconscious reactions. In other words, instincts, um, stepping away or, doing something like that. Let me see what do I have in my
Oh,
notes.
I would also like to say here for subconscious reactions that this is a really good thing to build into your character sheet to give the character like a subconscious tick that they do if they're stressed or they're angry or whatever,
Mhm.
because then you can use that as a means to distinguish them from any other character.
So what I wrote in my notes was this is the action, or this is action as instinct or reaction because the character is aware of their um, motives. In other words, it's excellent for surprise, trauma, conflict between the consciousness, intent, and deeper values. Like he found himself backing away even before he realized, without thinking, her hand shot out. Little
Mm.
things like that, because then you can convey that interiority that it's sort of that knee jerk kind of interiority that they're feeling something instantly. Like he found himself backing away before he realized whatever. That's that could be the situation that would fit in, maybe it's a fear type situation, or they just watch someone they loved die or whatever. So it could be a shock type thing. So it's just that the reason why I included as this, and again, these get abstract, but it's that subconscious inner interiority. It's I'm not actively thinking about the horrific thing that I'm seeing or the monster that just jumped out in front of me. My body is reacting without me consciously saying something, but it still lets the reader know how I'm feeling in that moment.
Yes. Okay. I'm happy with that. I'm I hesitate with sub. I'll tell you why I struggle with subconscious reactions. I hate writing before he realized.
Right. And I get that. And that's one of the things that I was like when you were like, okay, I'm good with that. I was like, oh, she's gonna go on with this. I really put this in here knowing that you'd be like, but I don't like writing that
I
because
don't like writing it.
it
I don't.
because I know your
So
reason.
when I yeah.
Your reason is if I don't know about it, how does the narration know about it to put it in there?
Yes.
So, but
And
it's still my response to that would be it still gives the reader the understanding that I'm not aware of this thing, but it's happening to me, so I am aware that I'm backing up. I just
right.
didn't realize I was backing up until just now.
So I guess like the way that I like to do those kinds of subconscious reactions is something like um, he stumbled backward and slammed into the wall.
Hmm.
Why did I do that? Maybe an inner monologue, right?
Right.
Or why had he done that, if you want to do it
Actually, the way
that.
you did it, you don't even have to add anything.
Yeah,
He stumbled backward, his back, or his back. He stumbled backward, slamming into the wall.
yeah,
He's obviously not thinking about that.
yeah.
So,
So
there's an
that's how I
argument.
like to do subconscious.
Yeah.
I like to I shear away from the realized
Hmm.
or from the without thinking about or
Hmm.
before he thought about it or anything like that.
Hmm.
Because all of those are filters to me.
They are. And it goes back to the naming the feeling. Are
Mm.
these tells? Yes.
Yeah,
But does that mean that they're bad?
sure.
Maybe, but maybe
Sure.
not.
And I mean, I'm not saying everybody has to follow me down by no means. You don't have to follow
Oh,
me
yeah.
down any path. You never have to follow me. But
Nor me.
I sheer away from this. I don't like them
Yeah.
personally. I like
Yeah.
to do it a little bit more showy to show that it's a subconscious reaction in some way.
Yeah.
Anyway,
Well, so here's the thing. I say this is another thing that I say all the time. Every decision you make as a writer is going to lose you readers.
mm,
So, like, I read something the other day in group, And one of the persons who is actually my target market, who is actually a fan of my writing, was the only one in the room that was like, I won't read this. And it's because the opening chapter, I introduced the POV character and he can't remember anything. And
Mm.
he's like, I hate the amnesia trope. I
Yeah.
refuse to read anything. He's like, now the thing that sucks is I actually really enjoyed this. This story actually started pulling me in, but I'm not going to read it because I hate that. Like, I'm just going to put my flag in the I don't like amnesia trope.
Mm.
Even though he was like, but damn it, it was good and interesting, and I really kind of want to read it, but I don't because I won't do that trope.
Mm.
Um, and then
And there's lots of people who don't like certain tropes, and I mean that's fine. It is what it
yeah,
is, you know.
well,
Yeah.
I've got people that won't read me because I use inner monologue,
Yeah.
but I've also got a ton of people who love reading me because of my inner monologue. And
Yeah.
so you can't write for everybody. You have to, and that's what I use that moment as an example of saying, this is what I mean. You can't please everybody. This
Yeah.
person's a fan of my work. They're not going to read this thing that I'm going to write. Am I going to not write it because one person, and it extrapolates, he's probably 10,000 people, 50,000 people, 100,000 people. It'll
Yeah.
extrapolate out. But do I not write it because of that? Because he's still a percentage. He's still a 1%, 2%, 5% of my readers. Do
Yeah.
I
Of
not write something because 5% of my readers aren't going to read it? No, because
course not.
95% of them, or 90% of them, or 80% of them, whatever the percentage is, are still going to read it. So, you can't please everybody. So yeah,
Exactly.
if you use the without thinking, her hand shot out, some people are gonna be like, oh, if she didn't think about it, why is it in narration? You're unlimited. And there's an argument for that. I mean, that's a valid argument.
It is.
But I, there's also a valid argument on my side where I say, yeah, but they realize it afterwards, and it would be really
So
weird for me to end it and go, wow, she didn't even realize she had thrown her hand out. Like,
and it's prose. It's prose,
right.
you know. So
It's
you
still
you can
prose.
you're communicating to the reader. It's and however you communicate to the reader is how you communicate to the reader. It's like, yes, the character will never think about their blonde hair, but you're still going to include it somewhere on the page because you need to make it look like it. 100%. These are just things that you have to get in there. But for me, I like to do my subconscious
Yeah.
a little
It's
bit more.
funny because I literally wrote the line, the wind batted his long blonde hair around.
Yeah.
I just
I've
wrote that
I've
like
I've got
two
this
days ago.
Gilliam guy. I've got this Gilliam guy pulling at his curly black locks to make him look demure. You know, like, he's never gonna think that. It's not there for him to think that. It's there to make to give the
It's
characters
I like to say
appearance.
it's as organic of a way to get it to the reader as you can
Yeah,
do in prose. Like other
exactly.
than just going, he had black curly hair. His
Yeah.
hair was black and curly. Like it's just like he felt fear versus
Yeah.
fear tingled across his spine, to go back to
Now, I
your
will I will say you can make the he had black hair really evocative. Jacqueline Carey does that in Cashil's Dart, but that whole series is about looks and appearances and so on. So she goes, "My eyes weren't brown. They were a color that only our language has a word for, the color of smudged charcoal at midnight that the poets called bistre." It's glorious. It's ridiculously overblown and
yes.
amazing.
Yeah.
Anyway, 8.
All right. Um, 8 would be the memory of experience. What I also call emotional triggers.
Yeah.
So what I wrote down for it, and we should have probably been reading all of these, but um, triggered through association, less direct than I feel whatever, more immersive when a sensation or situation triggers memory or an echo. As an example, the smell of cigarette dragged her back to that kitchen years ago, or it reminded him of the day his father left.
Hmm.
So we have a situation that triggers, not only does it give us a little backstory, but it also brings emotions with that baggage. And so I feel like that's another layer of interiority that we can use I can't in the story that I have the character that doesn't remember anything, but normally we can use that stuff to trigger things.
Yeah.
And
You
I,
can, and even with an amnesia character, part of the thing of an amnesia character is sometimes having things that trigger a feeling without the associated memory. Um,
well,
and why am I feeling that?
the problem is, and this is what I tried to explain to him, he doesn't have amnesia.
Yeah.
There's a very prophetic line in there where he's talking to this person trying to explain what he feels, and he says, I feel like the world was born minutes ago and I along with it. And I'm like,
Ah,
he doesn't have amnesia. I know
I
it
got
feels like
you.
he has amnesia, but he doesn't have amnesia.
I got you.
Because he's like, well, just start the story in another way. I'm like, the story is that. Like, it's like this is the idea for the story. And yes, he doesn't remember anything because there is nothing to remember. But that is the story. Without that, the idea that I have that I'm telling is not going to work. Um, because I also never thought I would do an amnesia trope, but technically it isn't, even though you do think it is in the beginning. Later you'll
Yep.
find out. But that's why I put that little prophetic line in there. Now
Yep.
it's very, very obscure and nothing. I mean, it's such just a poetic abstract line that no one's gonna go, oh, he was just born a minute ago. Like no one's gonna take that literally. But I
Yeah.
did put it in there to be a little nudge, nudge, wink, wink. No one's gonna notice it but me, but there it is. I did put it in there at the very beginning. Um, so you can't say that I didn't know where I was going with this whole thing. But yeah, it's but I do think that's another part of the interior world, and that's really interiority is another way to think about it, is the interior world of the character, the things that are
Mm.
going on inside of them. So
Yeah.
while some of these you might be going, well, I don't really think that's interiority. I mean, it is. It's their interior world. It's their inner world. It's that, like I said, from the external observable to the deepest psychic self. Like that's what I consider everything to be interiority, and that's why this list kind of sprang into being. So number
Yep.
9, and this is the one that I want you to use your example for,
Hmm.
which is imagined outcomes. In other words, desires or fear of the future. So this is
Yes.
a great way to bring in how the character, not only does it foreshadow probably what's not going to happen, because obviously whatever they fear isn't going to happen, or whatever they hope isn't going to happen. I mean, it's kind of a way to foreshadow
Yeah.
opposite of saying what might happen. Um, but I do believe it still gives that internal world of your character. So
Yes.
you had a really cool thing that you had written with this.
Yeah. So this actually is going to happen to the character, but it's obviously going to turn out differently from
Right,
what she's fearing. Okay. So
right.
Elowen's shoulders drew to tense lines beneath her silken gown. I'm going to be married to a fae. I promised father I wouldn't touch their world. I swore I'd never turn into one of them. But we have no choice. I'm going to be married. The circling thoughts drummed out everything else.
Yeah.
And then
So that
basically it
goes
goes
back
on.
to what you were saying about um the circular kind of way of doing it in that inner
Mm.
monologue.
And
So you can
that's
also
something that you could only pull off that circle in inner monologue, right? You can't write in narrative monologue, you can't give that pattern of thoughts and then restart with I'm going to be married. Because that was
right.
what the circle was, right?
Hmm.
But in inner monologue, you can do it and show that her thoughts are circling.
Right. And you could do it in narration. It would just be telly and crappy, and it
It's
wouldn't
too
work as
weird.
well as the
Yeah,
inner monologue.
yeah,
But you also had a metaphorical or poetic internal reaction as your opening line there. So
yes,
again, this is what we're talking about. It's not about any one of these layers. It's about using two or three of them in every one of your emotional moments, four or five of them even, and being able to use that as the layers of a cake that the reader gets to consume. So you had two different things there based on my list that I created last night on the 12
Yeah.
layers of inner monologue or interiority. So you had the metaphorical internal reaction, and then you had the desire, denial, or sorry, the imagine outcome. Sorry, desire, denial
Mm.
is number 10. Um, so that imagine outcomes, like, oh, I'm thinking about my future. I'm thinking about this bad thing is going to happen to me, or this good thing is going to happen to me, or whatever. That is still a part of that character's inner world. It's still important. It still connects the reader to them at a deeper, more intimate level.
I think like, and it's also important to remember all of those combinations. Like even that Gilliam passage that I read, it comforted him is the named emotion. His reflection on it, why did it comfort him? Everything had changed, and yet some things stayed the same.
Yep.
Everything about him had changed, but the world stayed the same.
Yeah.
And that is your philosophical reflection. It is the combination of layers that form a rich cake for the reader
Hmm.
to consume.
Hmm. Oh, and also you had number 6, inner monologue.
Yes.
So
Yes.
technically, you had 3 different layers of the cake in that one,
In that
little
one
section.
imagined in the one circling thoughts. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think it
And
works really well to show her fear in this moment and
mhm,
her, everything else. Yeah.
yeah. So,
By the way,
and
people, if you want really good, like how to write interiority, read some freaking romance. You know, romance, because romance is so focused on feelings, romance writers are actually really good at bringing out interiority.
yeah, because the story takes place inside, it's an inside story.
Yeah.
You know, the external events are not the story. The external events are just the structure that we're putting it on. But the thematic element of romance is romance.
And
It's
that's
that.
and that's why romance writers can get away with a formulaic structure because they're not
Hmm.
being read for the plot, they're being read for the internal life.
Yep.
So,
They're, you know, people don't read porn for the sentence structure. They
yeah,
read it for how it makes them feel.
yeah,
So, like, that's just the way it is. And I'm not saying romance is porn. I'm just
yeah,
going one step deeper.
yeah, yeah.
So, yeah, and all that's the importance of this. And this is why I broke this down like this to try to say, because everyone's like, well, I don't understand. I mean, well, there's a lot. There's a lot of
Mm.
things. There's all sorts of ways to do it. But I can't just say that in a writer's room and just go, there's a lot of ways to do it. Just figure it out.
The peanut gallery is asked read it again and point out each one. So do you want me to read it and then we can stop and say which part is
Yeah.
which?
So the first line is internal reactions or more
Yeah.
metaphysical. But yeah, go ahead and read that first line.
So the first line is Elowyn's shoulders drew tense lines beneath her silken gown. So that is your body reactions.
Hmm.
And tense is also naming um the
Naming the
emotion,
feeling.
naming the feeling. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I
Um,
waffle back and forth on that is because it could be metaphorical because like does it really draw lines?
no, obviously
Um,
not. Yeah.
but I mean, but depending on how it is, maybe there is a line across her gown,
Yeah.
based off of her flexing or something like that. So it could be
Shoulders.
that could be internal um body reaction, it could be body language, it could be metaphorical poetic,
Yeah.
it could be naming the feeling. There's an argument to be made to put that into any of those categories.
Yeah. But basically it's all in that kind of physical layer,
Yeah,
the
it's
top
it's the
and bottom.
top layer. You don't feel anything from it. You
Yeah.
just get you just
Told
get
what she's feeling. Yeah.
right. You just get the physical. This my shoulders are tense while I'm doing this
Yeah.
thing. But it's a
And then
great starting point. It
yes.
starts us down the path, and that's everything is about transitions. Every line should transition to the next line, and so this line is going to transition to the next line. It sets that feeling that we're going to move forward.
Mm. Then the next line is in italics and it starts a whole little paragraph in italics.
So this
Each
is inner
sentence
monologue,
is,
which is one of
yeah.
the things we talked about.
Yeah. So it's inner monologue and each sentence is on its own line. I'm going to be married to a fae. I promised father I wouldn't touch their world. I swore I'd never turn into one of them. But we have no choice. I'm going to be married. Okay, so all of that is inner monologue. but it's also imagined outcomes because it's
Hmm.
I'm going to be married, which is real, but I'm going to turn into a fae. I'm going to disobey my father. It's all of the fear of the imagined outcomes coming. And then it's a show of circular thought because it starts with I'm going to be married and it ends with I'm going to be married. And then the sentence after that says, the circular thoughts drummed out everything else. Because,
And I would actually put that, there's an argument made that that is narrative monologue because
yes,
now it's the narration kind of giving the character's thought process,
yes,
which is inside the character.
yeah. And yes, I know I've just shown you the thoughts, but I did want to emphasize the
Hmm.
circular thoughts. Yeah.
Well,
So,
that's
so
something we talk about.
yeah.
That's something we talk about all the time in the writer's room. Do not feel like one of my worst problems when I started writing, my very first published book had a lot of this where I would tell and then show or show and then
Mm,
tell. And that normally is bad.
mm,
However, every once in a while, just tapping that nail, even though it's all in flush, just hitting it one more time with the hammer just to make sure. Like there's nothing wrong with that every once in a while.
yeah.
And so that's what you've kind of done there. You've just countersunk the nail
Mm,
just to
yeah.
make sure that it's like, no, it's in there because
Yeah.
it's important. It's important for the reader to feel that moment.
Yeah. So that's what the layers were on that little piece of monologue. Okay, so that was 10, the nine, imagined outcomes.
Nine.
What is 10?
What I put for 10 was desire and denial. In other words, self deception versus suppressed feelings. This is the war between the conscious and the unconscious feelings. The reader often sees the cracks in the character before the character does. Um, stuff like she tried to convince herself she didn't care, or, you know, he told himself it didn't matter. Like, this thing happened, but he didn't care. Like,
Mm,
it didn't matter to him, or he told himself that it didn't matter to him, or whatever. The character's denying it, but the reader knows the
mm.
character's denying it, but they're not really. And so that still is a part of that character's interior world of that back and forth.
So this is one of those places where I'm again in an awkward position.
Hmm.
So I don't like to say he told himself either. So I have a tendency when I write to just to do the desire and denial in a more showing way, which sometimes the readers miss. Sometimes I
Hmm.
should just tell more. But anyway, so where I will have the narration say he didn't care, but the actions all show that he cares,
Right.
and thus show the contradiction. Not, not that everybody gets that all the time, and sometimes I should just tell it.
Well, and it really is situational dependent. Sometimes that is the perfect way to do it, and 100% of the people, or 99% of the people, are going to get
Mm,
that meaning. Other times, you might be in such an abstract situation that doing that just a lot of your readers are going to just miss because there's whatever the situation is so abstract that this
mm,
another abstract moment they just don't pick up on it. And so maybe in that situation, you might say he told himself that it didn't matter, even though he knew it did. You
yeah,
know, is that telly? Yeah, but it depends on the situation. Depends on, is it the right moment for this? Is it not the right moment for this? For me, it's always about what does the reader gain?
yeah,
Does the reader gain more from the tell than the show? Does the fact that I'm telling them something so it's not as immersive and not as flowery and not as, sensory heavy give them the information better, even though they're losing some of this other stuff, they're losing the showiness side of it, then I'm going to
mm,
tell. It's not
yeah,
about showing 100% of the time. It really is specific to the situation.
yeah.
So that's why I do encourage people not to plant flags,
I
even though I have planted flags. Um, it's still something that you should try and avoid when possible. When you're like, oh, I'll never read a book that has an amnesia beginning. Um, okay, but now you just read something that you're interested in and you're gonna not read it because of what? Stubbornness, pride?
Yeah. Planted flags don't really help anyone.
Right,
Like I just try and avoid, like it just reads a little weird to me, like he told himself and so on. So I do try and
right.
avoid.
And that is the thing. It still comes down to, and this is what I struggle with in the writer's room, making sure that what I'm teaching doesn't change their voice.
Mm,
Because I don't want them to write like me. I don't want to
yeah.
produce a bunch of mini Drakes. That's not my goal. My goal is just to show them why writing it this way may impact the reader more than the way they wrote it.
Mm,
And but that means that we may go from a show to a tell. It usually means we're going to go from a tell to a show. Like most of the time, it means we're going from a tell to a show. But sometimes that tell is the right way to do it. Um, we already talked about philosophical
we
reflections a
did.
little bit. Um, so that one's pretty done. Um, the what I wrote down for it, because we didn't read that, was when the character generalizes from feelings to philosophy,
Mm,
drawing on their worldview or personal mythos, not just I feel, but kind of a what does this say about me?
yeah.
Um, or about life. So like maybe the world really was out to get him, or it's always the quiet ones you have to watch.
Mm.
Whatever. I did all this last night. My examples are not the best. I probably could have spent some more time on them because now that I'm reading them, I'm like, wow, that's not a
Uh,
very good reaction. Um,
so would you like a different one?
yes,
So I have been working on writing interior. Everybody works on writing interiority. This is not just a new writer thing or whatever. It's always a thing you should be thinking about because there's
it's
always
the hardest.
interesting ways to do it.
It's the hardest thing to write.
It is. It is singularly the hardest thing to write.
Hmm.
So this is from a different character in that Gilliam Giselle thing. Alund opened his mouth and she could read the no perched on his tongue, heavy with good intentions. She stopped its flight. I'll be perfectly safe. If it eases your mind, send Rahul to loom behind me like a shadow. But you know I'm right. She held up a hand, counting off the reasons. I have the rank, I've been to Somfa before. I'm related to Louis, who stands as sash father to the Baroness of Somfa. But beneath each counted digit, another truth curled like a fist. She would go, because who else could he send? It had been that way with her aunt before her marriage, and the habit had continued with Alund. It was her loyalty to her liege that turned her into a hinge, always holding together whatever risked shattering apart.
So much bigger.
Yeah,
And it also, what does it say about her? She's going to
yeah,
do it more out of obligation, more out of just the
yeah.
history of her family.
She is driven by her duty, and that
Hmm.
is her philosophy and her worldview, and therefore she will go and do this thing.
Hmm.
Um, and it leans into that whole setup.
Yep. All right. That brings us number 12.
Yes.
And number 12 goes the other direction. It's actually the anti-interiority. So, um, I titled this one Disassociation or Emotional Numbness. So this to me this is powerful when the character is overwhelmed. Sometimes the lack of feeling or the numbness is itself the interiority that we want to show to the reader. The line like it was like watching someone else's life. We just described something that's happening to this character, but then we get but it was like watching someone else's life. I wrote this
Mm.
I because I was late and tired and I didn't feel like going deeper, but I wrote she felt nothing. And yes, there's a feel felt in there. And yes, I hated it even as I typed it out. But um but it's a great example for what I mean by this.
Yeah.
She felt nothing. Um Obviously now that I'm awake a little bit more, numbness cloaked her like a blanket would probably be a more showy way of saying
of
she
doing
felt
it.
nothing.
Yeah.
To
In my
again.
in my current whip, my current big whip, I should say, Sangwil Tales, I have a character who is disassociated from his emotions at the beginning.
Hmm.
And I wrote him almost without interiority because he doesn't feel because he suppresses all of that.
Hmm.
And it's that kind of like, you know, way to remove the interiority almost. But it only works if, from the reader's perspective, it's like a, huh, why is there nothing here? So
Right.
everybody else has to have interiority, or that character needs to have had interiority all the way up to here. And now you just state the flat events that are happening. Like it
Mhm.
jars the reader into the numbness that the character is feeling.
Yeah, the Alith character of mine was interesting to write, or is interesting to write,
Mm,
because 10 days before the story, she had never felt emotions, although she is feeling them now when the story starts. The problem
mm.
is that she hates them.
Yeah.
So when she has interiority, I then have to have interiority of her raging against the fact that she's having interiority. And like then it becomes this downward spiral for her of because
Mm,
then she's mad that she feels mad, which makes her mad that she feels
mm.
mad for feeling mad. And then like and so it's just this spiral of
Yeah.
death for her.
Self-reinforcing. Yeah.
Yeah. So so that's interesting to play with somebody who hates the fact that they feel.
Mm,
But that is her story. Her story in the first book is all about her and her battles with the fact of getting emotions. She's not human. And so
yeah.
getting emotions is weird and wrong and a weakness. And then but they're not going away. So her story
Mm.
is about
Dealing with them.
yeah, changing.
Yeah.
This is reality. This is the way your life is. You've got to deal with this. So it was a fun it's a fun thing to play with. But again, it's all interior world.
Yeah. And sometimes you do need to give that very blunt no interiority, or the
Hmm.
numbness or the like,
Hmm.
because that is what would be most evocative in the moment.
Well, also when we do the horrific stuff that we do to our characters, at some certain point you're gonna break them, or at least I do. And
Yeah.
once I break them, I want the reader to feel that brokenness,
Yeah.
that complete hollowed outness. So yeah, so that's the
Okay.
12 steps that I came up with,
That is the 12 layers of
or
interiority.
layers.
I think that's some like I wouldn't that's basically covers my layers as well. I generally talk about the three modes. The showing mode, the telling and reflection mode, and then the larger philosophical mode,
Hmm.
connecting it
Yeah.
to a larger theme. Um, which basically we've broken down into like the first four layers would be mostly the showing mode. The From narrative monologue to about 8 would be mostly telling, and then
Hmm.
9, 10, 11, 12 is the
Yeah.
larger philosophical themes.
Yeah, that's funny. Because I had never heard your three modes before. And so it's weird that I came up with 12 and they fit exactly 4, 4, and 4 into your three modes.
Yeah.
Basically, just to kind of put a bow on this, I am convinced that today's readers want to feel. They want to experience the internal world of the character as well as the cool external story. I just don't think that most readers today want to read, a Beowulf, which is just the external,
Mm.
adventure. Beowulf is great. It's lasted for 800 years. It's not it's not a bad story to last 800 years or 1400 years depending on which one where you want to go with that. Um but it is still external. It is still just this dude doing a thing.
But Beowulf is a myth. It had a myth reinforcement techniques within the culture it
Right,
existed in.
right.
It's not a story in a normal sense that a reader reads.
I'm just throwing that out as an
Yeah,
example because it's a lot of external stuff.
yeah.
Um, and if you are out there and you're having people read your stuff and they just don't feel impacted by it, it's probably because you don't have interiority.
If they say if your beta readers, because your beta readers aren't going to tell you you don't have interiority unless they're also writers. But if your beta readers are just readers, if they say words like "I didn't connect with a character" or "the character didn't draw me in,"
Yes.
chances are about 90% that you don't have enough interiority in your story.
Yeah.
Because that is how readers connect to the character, is through interiority. That's what draws them in and what pulls them through to the rest of the work. Interiority is gonna get them there. And you get to interiority by deliberately putting it in. It doesn't fall onto the page by its own self. It's not going to blossom out of your writing. It You have to actually actively put it onto the page.
Yeah.
And I think
And
that
what's
these 12 layers are a great way to actually do that.
and what really spawned this is I had two people join the writers room in the last couple of weeks, and both are actually really solid writers, but they both stop at that internal body language kind of layer
Mm,
because they both and they weren't together, they just happened to come at the same time. It's just they were both taught, when they're up and coming through and learning all this stuff, they were both taught you can only show, and this is where you show, and that's where, you can't do anything else. Anything else is, navel gazing or telly or, whatever. And they're not wrong. As we said, some of this stuff can get more telly,
like
but
in our last crit thing that we did last time we did a crit, we had a paragraph that was all navel gazing that we said is too much. We said
mhm,
for us it's too much,
right. It
right?
was only one
You
paragraph too.
can, yeah, you can go too much. It's
Hmm.
possible, but you
But we
should
still need to,
go somewhere.
yes. We need to go deeper than that. We need to go deeper than just sweaty palms and thumping hearts and, hair rising on the back of our neck or our arms or whatever. Those are needed. I'm not saying don't do those. Those are 100% a part of this process. They're just the surface layer of that process. We need to keep going deeper and deeper and deeper because that is where that's where the audience is going to find that deep, intimate connection with the character, which is going to give them a deep, intimate connection with the story, which is going to give them that deep, intimate fulfillment when they get to the end of the story and make them reach deep into their pockets to give you more money for everything else you've ever written because you have proved to them that you can make them feel something. And
Exactly.
that's where we're going with this. We need to make a living at this if we're going to be doing this full time professionally. So, yeah,
And I
it's just
think
deeper than just that first layer.
and I think that that is a good place on which to end this episode. We will see you soon for another one.
Bye.